Hello, my name is Zamar Gardner, and today we're going to be talking about free speech in the digital age and the evolution of the First Amendment. I'd like to start this presentation off by just talking about what the First Amendment actually is. The five freedoms of the First Amendment is the freedom of speech, the right to express opinions and idea without government interference, freedom of press, the right of journalists and media organizations to report news and express opinions without government control or censorship, freedom of religion, the right to believe in, practice, or change any religion or no religion at all without government interference or punishment, freedom of assembly, the right to gather peacefully and protest or support, freedom of petition, the right to ask the government to address issues or make changes. These freedoms empower citizens to question its authority, but interpreting them in the age of social media is more complicated than ever. Protected versus unprotected speech, or FIDO. The First Amendment protects a wide range of expression, but not everything we say is legally protected. Courts have defined several categories of speech that fall outside First Amendment protection. Things that are protected are political opinions and criticisms of government, peaceful protests and demonstrations, artistic and creative expression, and accurate news reporting and commentary. Things not protected, or FIDO, is fighting, or for F, fighting word speech intended to provoke violence. I stands for incitement, encouraging illegal or violent acts. D, defamation, false statements that harm reputation. And O, obscenity, sexually explicit content without value.
Hello, my name is Kayla Reinick, and I will be doing the historical timeline to the transition to online speech. So, when we think about free speech in today's digital world, it's really easy to focus on what we have now, which is social media and technology and the ability to almost always instantly say something. But to really understand how we got to this point, we have to look all the way back at key court decisions that shaped what freedom of speech means in the first place. So the story starts with the Schneck versus United States case in 1919. During World War I, Charles Schneck was arrested for handing out pamphlets opposing the draft. The Supreme Court ruled against him, saying speech that presents, quote, a clear and present danger can be limited. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes explained that some speech can pose a danger that the law can't ignore, like shouting fire in a crowded theater. This case became the foundation for deciding when speech crosses from protected expression into harmful actions. Jumping forward, we see the New York Times versus Sullivan case in 1964. The court set a different tone in this one. This case involved an Alabama official suing the New York Times for a civil rights ad that contained minor factual errors. The court sided with the press, saying public officials must prove quote unquote actual malice to win a libel case. Law professor Samantha Barbas wrote that quote, Sullivan transformed the course of public discourse and broadly protected the freedom to comment on government and public affairs. This ruling cemented press freedom as a cornerstone of democracy. Then, in the Tinker versus Des Moines case in 1969, students wore black armbands to protest the Vietnam War, and they were suspended. The Supreme Court ruled in their favor, declaring that, quote, students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. Together, these three cases, Schneck, Sullivan, and Tinker, have expanded the boundaries of free speech, protecting political dissent and symbolic expression across American life. So, fast forward a few decades and everything changes. With the rise of the internet and social media, free speech has suddenly become a lot more complicated. Everyone now has a global platform, whether that's their phones or their laptops. What used to be newspapers or TV can now reach millions and millions of people so easily. Political science Samuel Peter Nelson writes that, quote, legal matters dealing with free speech in society often occur through regulation of online parties. Speech in cyberspace is not as easily addressed by the US Constitution. In other words, the First Amendment wasn't written with Facebook, TikTok, or Twitter in mind because these platforms are privately owned. They're not bound by the same rules as the government, which means they can remove or limit speech however they choose. Another recent study in the Laws Journal adds that, quote, litigation continues on the boundaries of student speech, especially expressive activity on social media. So even over a century after Schneck, we're still debating where the line is between free expression and harm, only now it's happening online. The evolution from the printing press literally to the press of a button shows just how fast the landscape has changed. What begins as a few landmark court cases now extends to billions of digital voices, all speaking at the same time, all arguing and debating at the same time. And our challenge now is figuring out how to protect that freedom while maintaining responsibility in an age where we can communicate almost instantly.
So now that we have seen how speech protection has evolved historically, I want to look at one of the most important modern free speech cases, Mahanoy Area School District versus BL from 2021. This case started with a high school cheerleader named Brandy Levy, who ended up not making her varsity cheer squad. And out of frustration, she posted a Snapchat quote saying, F school, F cheer, F everything. This post was an off campus post that was made off of her personal phone, shared privately with friends, but somebody ended up taking a screenshot of the photo and showing it to her coach. The school ended up suspending her from the cheer team, claiming that her post violated their team rules about respect and positivity. Levy did end up fighting back, arguing that her First Amendment rights had been violated by this scenario. When this case reached the Supreme Court, the justices did, in fact, rule 8-1 in her favor, saying that schools cannot punish for off-campus speech just because it's offensive or unpopular, unless the speech ends up causing major disruption. Bullying, threats, off-campus personal speech is protected. According to a 2021 article in the First Amendment Law Review, this case represents the court's first major ruling on a student speech in the social media era, which ended up fundamentally changing how schools can respond to this online personal expression. What's interesting about this case is how it connects to the broader question of who does control free speech online. Unlike the government, social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, these are all private companies. This means that they are not bound by the First Amendment. They can remove posts, suspend accounts, and enforce their own form of community guidelines, even though the government legally cannot do the same. Legal scholar Kate Klonick, writing in the Harvard Law Review, calls social media platforms the new governors of speech, wielding more day-to-day power over expression than the government itself. So while Mahanoy versus BL protected Brandy Levy's Snapchat under constitutional free speech, those same platforms could still take it down for violating their internal rules. That's the tension that we end up seeing in today's world. The government must respect lawful speech, but private platforms do have the power to regulate what people can actually say or share. These companies have become the new gatekeepers, as we like to call it, of public speech, shaping these conversations, setting boundaries, and deciding which voices get to be amplified. In journalism, this shift has changed everything. Social media has become both the newsroom and the comment section. It tends to be where stories break, where they're debated, and where this misinformation tends to spread the fastest. A 2022 Harvard Journal of Law and Technology study found that around 60% of journalists believe that social media platforms have way too much power over which stories really reach the public, showing how free press and platform policy are completely now intertwined. For example, during the 2020 election, platforms removed or labeled thousands of posts as misinformation. Some of these were correct, while others seemed to just be out of controversy, showing how content moderation became a form of editorial control that no traditional newspaper ever had beforehand. The Mahanoy case is a reminder that speech protection belongs to individuals, not just these big institutions. And in today's digital world, journalists have to be able to balance legality, accuracy, and reach, all while having to also understand how algorithms and moderation shape what audiences actually do see. So, moving forward, journalists need to be able to master both sides, not just what's legal to say, but where it's allowed as well, how it spreads, and who ultimately does control it. We've seen how the courts have adapted and how platforms have taken control, But what happens when AI, deepfakes, and new technology push these boundaries even further? Bella is going to show us where free speech is headed next.
Now, with free speech and the future of free speech, there's a lot to consider here. And can the freedom of speech go too far when there's defamation and slander and libel within defamation? Defamation meaning when you say things that are offensive to someone that can ruin someone's reputation. Slander is spoken, libel is written. And with the current Jimmy Kimmel situation, when he said things about Charlie Kirk and the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the person that committed that act of shooting him, his show got canceled. And that was a big controversy because, yes, was what he said good or correct? No. But it went against free speech, and that was the conversation over social media and the government and the country, honestly. As we know, we got a show back, and that's still been a controversial topic. And with deepfakes and the boom of AI over the internet in the last few years, because the internet has a reputation of not being the most trustworthy sometimes. You can't trust everything you read on the internet, every article you see. And with AI now, that's even more true of having less truth out there. And deepfakes, which are recordings of an AI image and video showing that someone like Obama saying like, I love Trump, like that can be a deepfake because he didn't actually say that, but it looks like he did. And that's enough to convince enough people to be concerned. And future challenges with the freedom of speech is that it's just harder and harder to interpret what fact is. And as journalists, we already face an uphill battle of no one trusting the media, fake news, crooked media, tons of biases on both sides of the spectrum. And so now, more than ever, is the time to report the truth and for the people. Next slide, please. And in the end, why does free speech matter? Well, the First Amendment was created all those years ago to create a standard of trust with everyone and being able to say what we want. And my friend here filming this, he can say what he wants, I can say what I want, we can voice our opinions and have a mutual respect of each other. And as former U.S. Senator John McCain said, we need a free press. We must have it, it's vital. If you want to preserve democracy as we know it, you have to have a free and many times adversarial press. And without it, I'm afraid that we would lose so much of our individual liberties over time. That's how dictators get started. They get started by suppressing free press. So no matter what side you're on, Democratic, Republican, in the middle, some random party that no one's ever heard of, you deserve free speech. We deserve free speach as Americans and journalists. Thank you.